is Biafra Liberation Army Network coming to you again. Please do subscribe, like, share, and comment.
Waiting you were about to watch could shock you. What is actually going on in Finland? The Finland government versus Simon Ekpa and Nigerian governments. Okay guys, let's go there. I will be right back. Thank you.
Simon Ekpa, currently detained in a Finnish correctional facility, formally applied for bail through his lawyer, Kalgares, but he rejected the court's stringent bail conditions, deeming them impossible and potentially dangerous traps. Out of the 10 bail conditions presented by the Pirkanmaa District Court, Simon Ekpa specifically rejected 5, including surrendering all global travel documents, submitting DNA and biometric data to international spy agencies, and making a 2-hour televised speech denouncing Biafra. Simon Ekpa was expected to submit all passports, including any diplomatic or dual national passports, within 72 hours. He refused, citing concerns over privacy, control, and potential misuse of the information. One condition required him to issue a live, public apology aired simultaneously in 10 countries, including Nigeria, the United States, the United Kingdom, and Israel. Simon Ekpa rejected this, fearing it could be used against him in future legal cases. Simon Ekpa was asked to facilitate the immediate disarmament of all alleged Biafra-linked militant groups before bail could be granted. He refused, suggesting it implied guilt or a leadership role in armed operations he denies. The court asked him to submit his DNA, voice samples, retinal scans, and full biometric data to 4 major intelligence agencies: Interpol, CIA, Mossad, and Nigeria's Department of State Services. Simon Ekpa declined, saying it was invasive, excessive, and dangerous. Another condition demanded that Simon Ekpa publicly renounce the Biafra movement in a 2-hour global televised event monitored by lie detectors and international embassies. He rejected it outright as a humiliating trap. Simon Ekpa argued that the conditions would not only violate his rights and dignity, but also incriminate him. Accepting them, in his view, would validate unproven allegations and betray the Biafran movement. Rather than comply with what he sees as oppressive and politically motivated bail terms, Simon Ekpa has chosen to remain in detention at the Kylmäkoski Correctional Facility while awaiting his final judgment later in July 2025. The Pirkanmaa District Court has scheduled the final judgment and proceedings. A panel of 3 judges will jointly deliberate and issue a verdict. On the cold morning of the 8th day of July in the year 2025, a tense silence enveloped the interior of the Pirkanmaa District Court in Finland. The courtroom, lined with polished wooden benches and the smell of fresh paper filings, held a subdued air of anticipation. All eyes were on the man whose name had grown to global significance over the past 2 years. A figure both feared and adored depending on whom you asked. Simon Njoku Ekpa. Simon Njoku Ekpa, the controversial lawyer, human rights activist, and leader of a faction of the Biafran independence movement, stood defiantly in his blue prison-issued overalls with his shoulders squared and his eyes calm. Detained since late the previous year under accusations of inciting unrest in both Nigeria and parts of Europe, he had made headlines yet again, not for what he said, but for what he refused to accept. Through his lawyer, a determined and outspoken woman named Maria Kalgares, Simon Njoku Ekpa had earlier submitted a formal application for bail. Many expected this to be a straightforward legal procedure. What followed, however, was a stunning rejection, not by the court, but by Simon Njoku Ekpa himself. The Piami District Court, after what seemed like weeks of deliberation, granted conditional bail. But those conditions, 10 in total, were what triggered a legal and moral standoff that captured headlines from Abuja to Helsinki. According to courtroom insiders and legal documents seen by observers, Simon Njoku Ekpa rejected 5 of the 10 bail conditions laid out by the court. His reasons were not simply rooted in legal technicalities. They were moral, they were political, they were deeply personal. One of the most controversial conditions was the requirement that Simon Njoku Ekpa surrender all of his global travel documents within 72 hours of his release. This included his Finnish passport, his diplomatic credentials, if any, and even any previously undeclared or dual national passports. On paper, this seemed standard, but to Simon Njoku Ekpa, it was a red flag waving in a storm. He stood firm, expressing fear that once his travel documents left his hands, he would lose control over his own identity and movement, not just physically, but politically. He spoke through his legal team, arguing that such surrendering of documents could be manipulated by powerful agencies to limit his ability to seek asylum, protection, or international support if the need ever arose. Then came the second demand, an invasive and arguably unprecedented call by the court. Simon Njoku Ekpa was asked to provide full biometric data to 4 global intelligence networks: the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States, the Mossad of Israel, the International Criminal Police Organization headquartered in Lyon, and the Department of State Services in Nigeria. This biometric submission was to include not just fingerprints, but also DNA swabs, retinal scans, voice samples, and even behavioral pattern analytics. It read like a science fiction security dossier. Simon Njoku Ekpa refused. He labeled it not only excessive but dangerous. He said the information could be used to frame him, track him, or even fabricate evidence against him in future proceedings in countries where political dissidents are often targeted with lethal efficiency. Privacy, he reminded the court, was not just about secrets, it was about power. And giving up such intimate biological data was, in his words, handing his life to those he believes have already judged him guilty without a fair trial. The third bail condition he rejected was perhaps the most emotionally charged. The court demanded that Simon Njoku Ekpa renounce the Biafra movement in a live, global, televised address that would last no less than 2 hours. It was to be transmitted simultaneously in at least 10 countries, including Nigeria, the United Kingdom, the United States, Israel, Canada, France, South Africa, Germany, Italy, and Finland itself. The broadcast would be monitored by international observers, embassies, and even advanced lie detection technologies. Simon Njoku Ekpa rejected this condition outright. In his eyes, it was a trap, a staged humiliation designed not just to discredit him, but to psychologically break him in front of the very people he had vowed to represent. What they ask is not justice, he told his lawyer. It is an exorcism, a public stripping of identity. To renounce Biafra, he said, would not merely be political betrayal, it would be spiritual death. Fourth on the list was a condition demanding that Simon Njoku Ekpa issue a public apology for all alleged acts linked to the Biafran struggle, whether or not he had any direct or indirect involvement. The apology was also to be simultaneously broadcast and would remain archived permanently as public record. This time, Simon Njoku Ekpa did not just say no, he called it a forced confession. He argued that apologizing for things he did not do would not bring peace, but would rather give ammunition to those who wanted to label the Biafran cause a terrorist movement. In his view, it would also be used by the Nigerian government as propaganda to demoralize the Biafran people and mislead the international community. But the most explosive of the rejected bail conditions was the demand that Simon Nyoku Ekpa actively facilitate the disarmament of all groups globally suspected to be affiliated with the Biafran armed resistance. The court appeared to imply that Simon Nyoku Ekpa had influence over these groups, which raised eyebrows both in the courtroom and across Biafran communities. Simon Nyoku Ekpa's response was swift and emphatic. He refused. He argued that such a request was not only dangerous, but criminally suggestive. Accepting it, he said, would make him appear as the leader of an underground militant network, an allegation he had long denied and which no court had proven. It would mean accepting criminal responsibility for the actions of countless anonymous actors across several nations. That, he said through his lawyer Maria Calgares, is not just judicial overreach, it is political entrapment. Simon Nyoku Ekpa's defiance shocked even his critics. While some legal analysts initially assumed that he would accept the bail deal to escape what had become a psychologically and physically draining detention, they underestimated the depth of his convictions. Others accused him of political grandstanding, arguing that rejecting bail gave him martyr status. But to his loyal supporters across eastern Nigeria, in diaspora communities in the United Kingdom and the United States, and in pro-Biafran organizations scattered across Europe, Simon Nyoku Ekpa had done something extraordinary. He had chosen prison over betrayal. Inside the courtroom, the judges looked visibly rattled as his statement rejecting bail was read out. The lead judge, a tall, stoic woman named Christina Vananen, tried to maintain judicial neutrality, but her fingers tapped nervously on the bench. She leaned over to whisper to her colleagues, and they paused proceedings for nearly 15 minutes before returning with an official response. The court, recognizing his right to reject the bail conditions, announced that Simon Nyoku Ekpa would remain at the Kilamakoski Correctional Facility pending the final judgment expected in the last week of July 2025. Outside the court, the reactions were immediate and intense. Supporters gathered near the gates, many holding up Biafran flags and placards bearing slogans like "You cannot silence freedom" and "Simon Nyoku Ekpa, the voice of the voiceless." In Lagos, Abuja, Enugu, and Port Harcourt, social media erupted with debate. Some argued that the bail conditions were necessary for public safety. Others said they were a colonial-style coercion dressed in legal clothes. Human rights organizations, including Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, issued cautious statements. While they did not directly endorse Simon Nyoku Ekpa's political agenda, they expressed concern over the scope and invasiveness of the bail conditions. One paragraph from Amnesty's statement read, "Courts must balance national security concerns with the individual's right to a fair, dignified and non-coercive judicial process." The conditions presented in this case appear to be highly politicized and unusually invasive. Meanwhile, Nigerian officials maintained a stoic silence, choosing not to comment on the finished court proceedings. But confidential sources within the Nigerian Ministry of Foreign Affairs reportedly expressed frustration that Simon Nyoku Ekpa had once again outmaneuvered a system they hoped would silence him. Back in his prison cell at Kilamakoski, a facility surrounded by pine forests and freezing lakes, Simon Nyoku Ekpa remains under 24-hour surveillance. According to prison staff, he spends much of his time reading, writing, and occasionally engaging in video-monitored conversations with his legal team. Despite the solitude, he appears unbroken. In a letter reportedly smuggled out through an international journalist, he wrote, "They may try to cage my body, but my spirit is not up for bail." As July rolls on, the attention of the world, especially among the Biafran faithful, remains fixed on the Piame District Court. The final judgment will not only determine whether Simon Nyoku Ekpa walks free or remains in custody, it will also test the strength of political resistance in the face of modern state power. What is clear is that this is no longer just a trial about legal infractions. It is a confrontation between belief and bureaucracy, between state control and personal conviction, between a man and the machinery of multiple nations. Simon Nyoku Ekpa's choice to reject freedom on the terms of submission will either elevate him as a symbol of unyielding defiance or isolate him further in the eyes of the international community. For now, the world watches, listens, and waits. And inside a small Finnish prison, a man who refuses to bend keeps writing, thinking, and preparing for whatever judgment comes next. Inside the Kylmäkoski Correctional Facility, where the icy winds blow from the edges of the northern lakes and where the nights are long and silent, Simon Nyoku Ekpa's cell has become more than just a space for confinement. It has become a symbol of resistance. Since the day he rejected the Finnish court's bail conditions, messages of solidarity have poured in from every corner of the world. Letters from university professors in South Africa, former diplomats in Canada, and activists from Germany have all been filtered through strict prison channels to reach him. Though he is denied direct internet access, his legal team reads him every message word for word. Maria Calgares, the legal warrior standing by him throughout this ordeal, has become a household name among the Biafran diaspora. Fluent in multiple languages and known for her strategic mind, Maria Calgares has stood before judges, international press, and human rights panels to declare that her client is not a criminal, but a political prisoner. In every interview, she reminds people that Simon Njoku Ekpa's defiance is not rooted in ego, but in a deep understanding of what surrendering to the court's terms would mean, not just for him, but for millions who still believe in the dream of Biafra. She has described the bail conditions as unprecedented in their brutality, unconstitutional in their application, and dangerous in their precedents. Maria Calgares argued that asking any citizen of a democratic country to give away their biometric data to 4 separate global intelligence organizations was akin to saying, "We own you now." She added that no European political prisoner in modern history had ever been asked to publicly denounce their beliefs for the sake of temporary freedom, much less do so while hooked up to lie detectors and observed by foreign embassies. In a moment that brought tears to the eyes of many watching the court proceedings online, she read out part of Simon Njoku Ekpa's statement to the judge. "If freedom demands that I become something I am not, then it is not freedom. If justice requires I lie to keep breathing, then I will hold my breath." Across the Nigerian states of Imo, Abia, Anambra, Ebonyi, and Enugu, candlelight vigils began springing up. In cities like Owerri, Nnewi, Onitsha, and Aba, supporters gathered quietly under the cover of darkness to light candles and pray for Simon Njoku Ekpa. Some of them wore T-shirts with his face boldly printed on them, above the phrase, "I stand with truth." Others came only with handwritten placards saying, "Do not break." But not everyone sees Simon Njoku Ekpa as a hero. Some governments, especially in Europe and Africa, continue to view him as a destabilizing force. In Nigeria, certain factions within the government describe him as a fugitive exploiting the laws of a foreign country to incite unrest back home. In recent closed-door meetings at the presidential villa in Abuja, senior advisors to the President of Nigeria have discussed issuing a formal extradition request again, although Finnish legal experts have made it clear that such requests are likely to be dismissed without strong evidence of criminal wrongdoing recognized under European law. One anonymous diplomat from an African country who is familiar with the case told reporters in Geneva that the real challenge is not legal, it is ideological. Simon Njoku Ekpa is not a soldier with a gun. He is a man with a microphone and a following, the diplomat said. You cannot arrest an idea. Meanwhile, in Finland, public debate has intensified. Some Finnish citizens are concerned that the high-profile nature of the case could strain Finland's diplomatic relationships with Nigeria, Israel, the United States and the United Kingdom, all nations named in the court's bail conditions. Political commentators in Helsinki have described the court's approach as one that dances on the edge of legality. One legal professor from the University of Tampere said during a public seminar, "We must ask ourselves, is Finland being pressured by foreign governments to go beyond the bounds of justice?" Even the church has not remained silent. A group of Christian leaders from Nigeria, the United Kingdom and Sweden wrote an open letter to the Finnish government. In that letter, they condemned the bail conditions as an assault on the conscience of a man of faith. The letter explained that asking Simon Njoku Ekpa to denounce Biafra, apologize for actions not proven, and facilitate disarmament of armed groups he has not publicly or legally admitted to leading, amounted to forcing a man to bear a cross he had not carved. The trial has now become more than a Finnish court case. It has become a global conversation about justice, about political resistance, about human rights, and about the boundaries of legal authority. Several universities have begun teaching the case of Simon Njoku Ekpa in courses related to international law, civil liberties, and post-colonial studies. Inside the Kylmäkoski Correctional Facility, Simon Njoku Ekpa's routine has shifted slightly since the bail rejection. He now receives a growing number of legal documents each day, some related to his own case, others from global human rights organizations hoping to consult him on the matter of political prisoners and international justice. According to Maria Calgares, Simon Njoku Ekpa uses the small desk in his cell not only to review his defense papers, but also to draft essays and letters that may someday become part of a larger political memoir. One prison staff member, speaking under strict anonymity, described him as quiet but unshaken. He does not curse, he does not shout, the officer said. He asks only for clean paper and privacy to think. The same officer confessed that he had never seen a prisoner who turned down bail, especially one who had the opportunity to walk free under legal terms. It is not normal, but he is not a normal prisoner, he added. As the countdown begins to the final court judgment later in July 2025, speculation is mounting. Will the Pyami District Court rule in favor of his full release? Will they impose new terms? Will the judges seek to pressure him further? Already, some political observers believe the rejection of bail has complicated the judge's job. They now have to either justify the harsh conditions they imposed or soften them in a way that does not make the court appear weak. Even within Finland's judicial circles, debate has erupted over the role of international pressure in shaping the bail terms. documents leaked to a Finnish newspaper suggest that intelligence officials from at least 3 foreign countries held private meetings with Finnish legal advisors in the weeks leading up to the bail hearing. While the exact content of those meetings remains classified, critics argue that the court may have been subtly coerced into treating Simon Njoku Ekpa more as a geopolitical threat than a defendant with rights. Meanwhile, in the streets of Abakaliki, a young woman named Ifeoma Nwachukwu, a university student and aspiring political scientist, explained what Simon Njoku Ekpa meant to her. "He is not just a man, he is a mirror. When we see him stand up against their lies, we see ourselves," she said. In the town of Umuahia, an elderly man named Chief Chukwuma Okafor, a retired school teacher who lived through the first Biafran War, held up a radio and told a local reporter, "During the war, they said we had no voice. Now, even from prison, our son speaks for us. He may be alone in Finland, but we are all there with him." From the quiet hills of Enugu to the ice-covered streets of Helsinki, the fate of Simon Njoku Ekpa continues to stir the minds and hearts of millions. His refusal to bend under pressure, to trade dignity for liberty, has made his story one of the most watched trials of this century. Whether his stand leads to freedom, martyrdom, or political transformation remains uncertain. But one thing is clear: his voice has not been silenced. As the final judgment day draws nearer, the weight of history settles upon the wooden benches of the Piame District Court. And, in a cold cell in northern Finland, Simon Njoku Ekpa sharpens his pen, not for surrender, but for a future that he still believes is worth writing.